Welcome to the Her Story Circle podcast, the podcast that brings you the extraordinary tales of everyday women who are changing the world. I'm your host, Brittany Martin, and I'd like to acknowledge traditional custodians of the land on which we meet today. I also like to pay my respects to elders, past, present, and emerging. Every week, we dive into the lives, challenges, and triumphs of women from all four corners of the globe. We're here to inspire, enlighten, and connect, sharing stories that uplift and empower. So grab a cup of coffee, settle in, and join us as we explore the incredible journeys of women shaping our future. This is Her Story, where every woman's voice matters. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Her Story Circle. This is Brittany Martin here in beautiful Melbourne, Australia. And today I am graced with the presence of yet another fascinating woman. Welcome, welcome, welcome to our tribe. Please tell everybody your full name, where you're based, and share your story with us today.
Hi, thank you so much for having me here. My name is Brittany Martin Dejean. I live about an hour outside of Philadelphia in the United States. And I am a mother. I am an advocate, and I am on a mission to help more people understand what most of society gets wrong about disability and help accelerate inclusion in our world. Why do I do this? I actually live down the street from the house I grew up in. It was a COVID decision that brought me back to my hometown, and I'm very grateful for. But when I grew up, so in this rural area in Pennsylvania, my story started, I guess one of the most pivotal moments was when I was 12 years old. My dad and my younger brother were in a car accident. My younger brother was killed instantly, and my dad broke his neck and became a quadriplegic. And especially out here in, as I mentioned, in this rural area, this was a very, it was on the front page of our local newspaper. I mean, it was a big deal. And for me at that time, I didn't really understand what was ahead for my family or for me as an individual. But in the wake of losing my brother, really all I wanted was that my dad would survive. And I was very lucky that he did. And I remember when the doctors came in and told us that he would never walk again. And I remember that the adults reacted very differently than I did. Because again, my 12-year-old mind was just, but he'll survive, right? And he did. And when he finally came home, I started to understand that the world was going to see him differently, was going to react to his wheelchair. But as a teenager, I didn't necessarily understand all of the elements of what that would mean and how it would play out. But, I remember a waiter asking me what my dad wanted to eat at a restaurant. And I was like, why are you asking me this? Until I realized how uncomfortable she looked. I've watched people push my dad up ramps and feel uncomfortable, coming out of nowhere and pushing him without even speaking to him, or sometimes even not answering when he would say no politely if they asked if he wanted help. And so this was all very formative to me. And about when I got into college, expanded more of my interest in disability and understanding this more broadly. And one of the situations that, in hindsight was a big moment was meeting someone with a different disability. And I realized I was the one being awkward. However, it didn't take me too long to realize, okay, I am treating her the way people treat my dad. So there's something wrong here, and there's something not right, and I'm going to have to fix it. And I was very lucky to have guidance from people who treated me with empathy, who helped me understand what I had wrong. And they led me to, they were very empathetic, but they weren't going to let me continue to have feelings like this. And so I actually volunteered at a camp for kids with disabilities with that family. And that really cured me. That helped me finally connect the dots to my own experience and understand all that I had wrong about disability. and connect it to the experiences of my family. And this really opened up a huge perspective for me, and it increased my interest in exploring disability more broadly, and using the fact that I had this personal connection in my family to connect with others. And shortly after that, I went on my semester abroad and spent time in Southwest China. And part of my semester included an independent study project where I had 1 month to go off on my own, and I chose to explore the lives of people with disabilities. And that was an incredibly formative month. And I met people who, wouldn't have spoken to me or didn't speak to me until I was honest and open about what had happened to my family. And then I was able to really connect on a human level. Not only was that important for me on the basis of disability, but it was my first time deeply connecting with strangers who came from a completely different culture, different language, different background. And in doing that, one man in particular that I met had a spinal cord injury like my dad, but had a lot more physical mobility. And so for me, my original assessment was, okay, well, my dad lives this fulfilling life. He had great care, great mentors, people who showed us that life with a wheelchair was possible. Life in a wheelchair was not only possible, but meaningful and fulfilling. So my dad had been living his life as a quadriplegic for many years by this point. And when I spoke to the man, he told me he would spend the rest of his life in bed. And that really affected me because up to that point, I had assumed that quality of life was based on physical mobility. That's as naive of a deduction that I had made. In meeting him, he had no vision for a different future. And it really made me think, there's more to this. And in his subsequent conversations I had, I really started to understand the degree to which perceptions of disability impacted so much of how people saw for their own future and saw for how others in society viewed them. And that really affected me because it made me think back to being 12, to being in that room when they said my dad would be disabled, and understanding that if I had thought some of the things that these people thought, that their life was effectively over, that I would have had a really hard time accepting that in the wake of my brother's death. That would have been devastating to me. And so it became even more important for me to dig more and understand how these things happen. And that semester actually led me to want to attack this problem by helping more people connect to resources. So like I said, my family, being near the Philadelphia area, we had access to exceptional care. And so my dad did adapt his life and go back to work and drive a van and do all the things. But I realized how quickly that was not the norm. And that really pushed me for a number of years to run an organization that helped connect people to resources online. So it wouldn't matter where someone was born or where they lived or what health insurance they had. I did that for a number of years. I was an organization called Able Thrive, maybe 7-8 years plus, lose track over the time. But when I started working on that, it opened up another can of worms. I realized going into the corporate spaces, talking about my work, doing things, that a lot of non-disabled people would come up to me and start sharing questionable things, inappropriate things sometimes that they were curious about and wanted to know more. I heard things like, well, I had a boss in a wheelchair once and I didn't know what to do, so I avoided him. I had someone else tell me that they rejected candidates with disabilities in the hiring process early because they were afraid to have to reject them later. So many things that made me say, wow, okay, this discomfort that I remembered feeling in college was rampant. And that made me feel like, one, I was positioned to help them because I wasn't going to shame them. I wasn't going to make them feel bad for it. I started to understand more about the themes and the misconceptions and the assumptions that led people to feel this way, that led me to feel that way, a decade and a half prior. And so I kind of took these things in, and I turned that into a training. At the time, I was still running my organization and attacking the problem from a different angle, but this one I brought into a corporate role. I worked at Airbnb for about 6.5 years and was working in disability inclusion accessibility. I brought that training to them. reached about 1,000 of our colleagues and hosts. I worked on other things as well, but this was a core part of where I really felt like I had value and purpose. And again, just reinforce this idea that a lot of people in business, this is a human problem, but it is very rampant in business, and it influences how people speak about disability, how they build policies, how they build cultures, how they think about accessibility. And so that really became the conversation that I felt most positioned to help with. And so during that time, Able Thrive was acquired by United Spinal, which is a prominent nonprofit organization in the United States for spinal cord injury. So in terms of getting people resources they need, I partnered with someone who could take the work we had done and then dedicated myself into this corporate space where I felt I was positioned to have an impact. And after doing that for a number of years, just left that role in March, so just about a month and a half ago, because I was ready to really dive in on this problem, to help more people feel comfortable with disability, to get over their awkwardness, to face their fear of messing up, and to talk about the topics that I think a lot of people avoid. In all my experience, I think I've learned that the way people think about disability is the barrier that doesn't get enough attention. And it's the thing that needs us to talk more about, to center empathy, to help people understand how to honor their good intentions. Because a lot of people who say these things, who are even being discriminatory, sometimes unintentionally, but if we can change the way people see disability, we can solve a lot of these problems. And so that's brought me to here. So now I started a new company called Inclusion Jumpstart. And I am speaking on this topic, discussing this, and wanting to bring it forward for more people to feel like they have a space to work through the misconceptions that are so pervasive. That's me.
Wow. I tell you, your story is absolutely incredible.
Thank you.
And until you meet someone who's had this lived experience of supporting someone with a disability and living in that world, you don't actually understand the challenges that people face. So, why do you believe people fear conversations around disability, and how do we change that?
I call it FOMO, the fear of messing up. I think it is a very human fear. It is grounded in good intentions, and I believe most people are good. Most people care. Most people want to do better. But I think that at the root of it, that fear can stem from ignorance. And I don't mean that disparagingly. I just mean that we are fed a lot of misconceptions about disability in the media, generations old stories told in different ways in different cultures around the world that end into a similar result. And when you get people who want to do good, but also have in their minds that certain misconceptions, like, of incapability, that people with disabilities are different, that they're a group of people over there, that feeds fear, because people feel there's a certain way it needs to be done, and they don't feel confident that they have it right.
Yeah, it's interesting. Now, what is the biggest myth that you would like to debunk about diversity and inclusion?
That it's an exercise in perfection. I think that because I speak about disability, and that's my specific, that's where my journey has led me. But I've worked more broadly in DEI, especially while at Airbnb, for a variety of different diverse communities, and a lot of it still applies. A lot of people, I saw a study somewhere of 55% or more of people that didn't want to even talk about DEI at all because they were afraid of saying the wrong thing. And so I think we have to, all of us, people working in the space, people who come from different marginalized communities, people who want to do better, we need to create more space for empathy, because at the end of the day, humans need to feel comfortable to make mistakes. And those making the mistakes need to also be ready to be accountable for them and be open to learning.
Now, let's address the elephant in the room with what is going on in the United States right now
Okay.
politically. I would be amiss not to ask this question around diversity with the current president who's in office. How is that impacting your work? I've had people say to me, please don't ask me anything about DEI when I interview them on the podcast. What's going on in the US?
Well, when it was first coming out, it was chaos. At the time, I was still employed at Airbnb. I used to be on Airbnb's DEI team. I jumped a few different teams, but so I still had a direct connection to teammates of mine, and then, colleagues across different companies, people I've known for years, and it was chaos. Just what does this mean? Is this really a thing? How is this going to shake out? And for myself, I had people, because this is right when I was making my transition. This has been something I've been thinking about and planning for a while. So, one change, a change like this wasn't going to stop me. This wasn't a snap decision that I made to go off on my own. But I had people say, oh, you probably shouldn't use the word inclusion. And I'm like, well, I'm not here to meet the moment in that way. I'm here to meet the moment that I think is needed, right? The change that I believe in. And so what I have seen is that a lot of practitioners in different ways, people that I'm connected to, and for myself, that there is a lot going on and there's still a lot that's not clear. But what is clear is that there are people running, but there are also people doubling down. And so for me, I had to stick with, this is what I believe in. This is what I'm good at. This is the change I want to have in my life at this point. These, I know the people I want to help. So to, and I'm just going to show up and there's going to be some people who'll be like, whew, I don't have to care about this anymore. But they weren't going to be the people I was going to be most effective with anyway. But for the people who understand that now is the time, especially in the US, but I would argue anywhere, to be a part of this conversation, to be more inclusive, to understand some of the pain and frustration and confusion that communities are going through. Like, this is the time to honor those good intentions and be a part of the conversation.
Now, I read somewhere a quote that said, everything you want is on the other side of fear. How does fear actually serve as a gateway to transformation?
It's funny you frame it that way, because I have been digging in a lot on fear. Well, in the nature of my work, but even in my own just fear of anything, right? Fear that is within us. It's not limited to one specific thing. And I've been learning that it is fear, feeling it is usually an indicator that there's room to grow. It's probably somewhere you need to go. And that's what I do. And, when I can reach someone who's willing to admit their fear, admit those things, like I mentioned in those conversations I'd have with people, a lot of it was based in fear. And it was meeting that to say, okay, well, you don't get to just keep that fear. Your fear is not only hurting yourself, but potentially hurting others. And so I think fear is at first an indicator that there's something there, something to explore. And then I think it's an invitation, if you get the right mindset around it, that it's only as threatening as we make it. and that we have to have grace for ourselves. You might not be ready to dive right in, right? But fully avoiding it or pretending it's not there is only going to hurt you in the long run.
It doesn't work. It doesn't work. So what makes your approach to DEI different from the traditional training models?
I don't think there's only one way to do it. I think each practitioner brings their own vibe to it. And I think what makes my vibe mine is that I have been willing to call out call out kindly the feelings, the behaviors, the attitudes that I think many people feel shame about and try not to speak about. So sometimes I feel, some training or some education can be etiquette or checklist based. And I'm all for best practices, like, people need to learn and need to understand. But when it comes to disability, I feel that there are certain core misconceptions that I've truly seen around the world. I've worked in disability communities in, Europe, Africa, Asia, US, and a lot of them are around, being incapable, being
Yeah.
miserable, or being knee-jerk inspirations that for even existing. And so if people believe one or all of those three things, they have a fundamental gap in how they're going to approach etiquette, how they're going to approach best practices. Because if they're not, those are things that tend to keep people from being able to look someone in the eye and have a conversation, like a human to human conversation. And so
Yes.
I don't, and that, I am not disabled. So I also am very mindful of where I can be and where I can sit. And I see myself as a door opener, because right now there are people who the idea of having a one-on-one conversation with a blind person or someone who has disclosed autism or something like that is going to cause that anxiety reaction.
Yeah.
My best case scenario is I can work with that person, open the door for them, help them understand where those fears come from, what they misunderstand and need to unlearn about disability, and get them
Yes.
into a position where they're able to then have those conversations and learn from the actual people with the lived experiences who have been screaming from the rooftops, but not everybody's ready to hear them.
So, can you share a breakthrough moment when you witnessed in your coaching sessions?
Um, Let me think. Yeah, I can. So I was working with, I did a workshop with a group of researchers. Um, and up to that point, one of them admitted, again, in the safe space that I create, that someone had been blind on a research intake form, or, for them to find research participants, and that they had not considered them and not brought them in because they weren't sure how to do it. Like, just weren't sure how to make that happen.
Mhm.
And by the end, and subsequently beyond our training, I helped them understand why, again, it's not shaming them. Like, it's not okay that they did that. And I don't want to pretend that it is, but
Yeah,
if you shame them and shut them down, they'll just run from the problem and hide. And
exactly.
instead, calling it out in a kind way and educating turned it into that person going on and having requirements within their research panels to have inclusive representation, including the disability community. And
Right.
understanding, what it means to ask questions and not make assumptions, and, but a mindset where, not perfection, but engagement, inclusion. But yeah.
Yeah, and it's not about perfection. You're right. I think people are striving for perfection, and then that makes them freeze and hold back. But it's not about perfection. It's just getting there and going as far as you can. So, what is the first step that any organization can take to begin an authentic inclusion journey?
Well, again, inclusion broadly, I think most effectively starts at the top. Leadership needs to actually care. I'm not grassroots are great too. Any kind of effort is going to be wonderful, but if it's an institution, I believe that leadership needs to set an example. That is a very valuable step to take.
Yes.
And then in that, understanding that it is not only lip service. Saying something is not the same as investing in it. So saying you care about inclusion, that you want diverse representation, that you want equitable and fair experiences, needs to go beyond those words. And that requires engaging with actual people from different
Yes.
communities, um, whether that's consultants in an interim basis while you build out more authentic representation within your organization. But at the end of the day, you can't do it in a vacuum. You can't do it with words. And you need to model, again, speaking to leaders here, but model what it looks like to put action behind your words, or money where your mouth is.
Yeah. Yeah. So, how do you help leaders to move from performative to transformative inclusion?
And well, so this comes back to kind of like my vibe approach on things. I think
Mm,
you gotta help people on the inside before you're tackling the institution. So
yes.
I am a full believer that you need to address the human, like take an individual leader who has power and influence in their company. They deserve the time and will benefit from the time to say, where are the barriers in myself? Where are my blockers here? What do I misunderstand? What assumptions am I making? And in a way that they can feel that, a sense of peace. Like I've watched, I almost feel like I've seen the weight come off of people's shoulders sometimes after I either speak to them, in a sort of one-on-one situation or in workshops, or they've told me like, oh, because good people, like I said, most people carry an enormous amount of stress. I might do this wrong. I might hurt you need I think with where we are right now, continuing to or opting towards punishment or calling out in a way that alienates people isn't going to help us. And this time we need to be welcoming people in while holding them accountable, but in a way that is empathy forward. And because leaders like that, our institutions are built by individuals, right? Yeah. And the individuals need to be aligned in order for those institutions to follow.
Oh, that is so true. I love that. So what role does storytelling play in your work?
Oh, I feel like storytelling is so critical when you're trying to reach people about topics that they don't have personal experience. Yeah. And that's in my work, in my life. Like when I was in China, if I didn't start with my personal story, no one would have spoken to me.
Yeah.
And so I have always found that by bringing our stories in, I have, different friends with disabilities. I've been doing my own conversation series on LinkedIn of just talking to different disabled people to have them share their stories, because that is the human side of a story, as opposed to, just a checkbox or facts or data, not unimportant, but if it's not in the context of a human being, I feel like it becomes, like an exam rather than an evolution of someone's like awareness. Back to that, your point of like, how do you actually transform someone? You need to give them an opportunity to feel a human connection.
Yes. Yeah, storytelling is powerful in that sense. It really makes things real. Now, how do you balance vulnerability and professionalism in conversations about trauma and identity?
I think there's a lot of power in vulnerability. I think that when you've gotten to a point where you understand how your stories have framed you and influenced you, sharing those things, I don't know. I hear you, because I know there are people who are like, oh, well, that's not professional or whatever. But it kind of comes back to my feeling like at the end of the day, we're all people. So it's not going to change what actually resonates with people. And so for me, I think there's anyone's ability to bring their full self to their work is going to include their stories, and some of those may be vulnerable. I feel most of us likely have stories that could be seen as vulnerable, but I think vulnerable doesn't mean bad. It doesn't mean weak. It means
a strength.
It's right. And so I think, and I find when people lead with their stories, it usually will reach and motivate people who maybe wouldn't have led with their story to be more open with theirs. And then that's the root of real connection and which can lead to change.
I love that. So what gives you hope in this work?
I've seen people change, right? I feel like I'm addressing a problem that is 100% fixable. That gives me hope, because most of what I think people have wrong is it's just things that they absorbed through culture, through society. Again, I know that I would have been that way if my dad hadn't been in a wheelchair. And then even with a disabled dad, I still did it to someone else in college. So, I mean, we're human. And I think that to know that I could make that evolution, to know that I have made that transformation for a number of people in different venues at this point, and the fact that now I can really just dive in on that, that's what gives me hope. Because one person, like that one researcher or the one recruiter who I convinced to not, just to disregard disabled candidates, they will change lives through their own subsequent actions. And all of those individuals, the more you reach, will then build systems. They will then build institutions. And those are the beings that wield a lot of power in what will ultimately lead to more inclusive spaces and societies and communities for people with disabilities, which is ultimately the goal I'm shooting for.
So let's finish off with two more questions that are a bit of a thought experiment.
Okay.
The first one, I'm going to teleport you back to that young woman whose dad had a disability. You've lost your brother. Life is just really bad. If you could go back and give yourself 3 nuggets of wisdom based on what life has taught you up until this point, what would those 3 nuggets of wisdom be? And imagine that there's somebody who's listening to this podcast right now is at that moment that you were at. What would you have wanted somebody to have told you?
Take it one step at a time. Take time to reflect and to take care of yourself. And don't think you have to do it all alone.
That's awesome. Last question is futuristic. I'll teleport you into the future this time. And we are going to go and meet the 90-year-old you.
Oh, fun.
She's sitting in her rocking chair, surrounded by her children, her grandchildren, her great-grandchildren, whoever's with you at the end. If you could go and meet this wise woman who has led you up until this point, what are you going to say to her when you finally meet her?
What an incredible journey, and gratitude for the opportunity to experience the ups and downs of life.
I love that. And I love the gratitude piece. A lot of women don't realize that the wise woman is already in us, that she's that quiet voice that tells you go left, go right, advocate, make a difference. And we second guess ourselves. We look outside of ourselves for solutions and answers. But it sounds to me like you're very in tune with this woman, and she has led you to do some phenomenal things in your life. So thank you for tuning into that. It's a beautiful example for others to follow.
Thank you. It's a work in progress, but I am absolutely working on trying to be more in tune to that.
Yeah, it is a work in progress. I have a little game that I play where I tune into the energy of who I am becoming. And I talk to her. Sometimes I get stuck. I can't figure things out, and I'll just go to sleep with a question in my head. And I just ask myself, so what is the next step? And
I've done similar things.
Yes, she comes to me in these dreams, and I get these insights. Or I wake up the next morning, I'm in the shower, and I get that light bulb moment, and I know exactly what to do to execute. So playing with the energy of who you are becoming, I think, is something that all women need to learn, because she is there. She has guided you all your life. And the more you tune in and listen to her, the louder she gets. So Brittany, thank you so much for coming online and sharing your story with us today.
Thank you so much for having me. It was great to meet you.
And thank you to everybody who tuned in. The Her Story Circle is not just a podcast. We are a social impact movement that brings you the stories and voices of women from all over the world. We share our stories to empower you, to educate you, to inspire you, but most importantly, to take you from where you are now to where you're trying to go. So tune in again tomorrow when I interview yet another amazing guest. In the meantime, have a fantastic day, morning, or evening, wherever you are in the world, and bye for now. Brittany, Don't go away. Thank you for tuning into the Her Story Circle podcast. I hope today's story has inspired you to believe in the power of our stories and the difference you can make in the world when you use your voice. I'm Gertrude Mache, and it's been an honor to share this space with you, where voices from all walks of life come together to weave a rich tapestry of diverse perspectives. Don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review our podcast to help us share these stories with more listeners. Follow us on social media by looking for the Her Story Circle podcast for more updates. And join us tomorrow for another episode filled with courage, resilience, and empowerment. Remember, your story matters, and together we're building a stronger, more inclusive world. Until next time, keep making her story. Thank you